We're about to go live. Hi, welcome to another episode of Weekly Brunch. And today we have a special guest, Dr. Rachel Turetzky, who is co-author of Eighth Circuit Ascension, I'm sorry. And we are going to be discussing this book, the philosophy behind it, as well as her new business. Rachel, thank you for being on my show today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Now, since we're going to focus on your book and your business, Owl, which I'm going to, let's see, both of them will show up here. We're going to talk about Owl later, but let's talk about your book and what brought you to writing this book.
So I initially came upon the Eighth Circuit model. It's close to 25 years ago, and I just had found it to be a really useful tool for understanding and working with psycho-spiritual, non-ordinary states. It was sort of introduced by a good friend of mine when I was first getting into Golden Dawn and exploring all kinds of occult stuff, and it really helped to map the territory. Fast forward, and maybe it was around 2015, met another really good friend of mine in the occult, and it was sort of reintroduced to me. It had been a while since I'd worked with it actively, and so it sort of brought that back on my radar. And also, I guess the timing of it was pretty magical because I'd been involved with working with MAPS, the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies, on their MDMA PTSD research. And so shortly then after, psychedelics sort of hit the mainstream. So knowing that there's this amazing model that was developed for the use of working with psychedelics and non-ordinary states of consciousness, it dawned on me like there really is no framework for working with these states. So it was sort of an idea. I would love to write a book about this and try to bring this model out, because at the time it was sort of in the fringes, and people who were considered psychonauts and people in subcultures were familiar with it, but not a mainstream, which psychedelics seemed to be going. So then when I met up with my friend David J. Brown, we were talking about it, and I was telling him about my vision to write this book, and he had said he'd always wanted to write a book on that. He was good friends with Timothy Leary and Robert Anton Wilson, and the whole cast of characters from that earlier wave of psychedelic, how would you call them, practitioners and kind of quote unquote psychedelic gurus.
Pioneers?
What's that?
Pioneers?
Pioneers, thank you. Yeah. And so we started to work on a book together, and then we ended up finding Dr. Douglas Wingate, who eventually did become my co-author on the book. And he'd already written a book on the Eighth Circuit model, but in relation to his work with traditional Chinese medicine. So anyway, so David ended up having to kind of step out just with time constraints, and so Doug sort of took the wheel with me, and we ended up publishing Eighth Circuit Ascension, a guide to metaprogramming the multidimensional self. And yeah, so it's just been an ongoing journey from there, just sharing the model itself, how to apply it to the current quote unquote psychedelic renaissance, and how it could benefit people both in with psychedelics, or people just in general. People are having more and more interest and experiences with non-ordinary states of consciousness and psychedelics and things of that nature.
Now, when you're writing something of this caliber, you have an end goal.
Mhm.
And I know you said it had benefits. Um, can you expand on benefits for whom and how those benefits would look like ideally to you?
Yeah, so the model itself, each circuit, as a circuit refers to like a functional layer of consciousness, where it's like a pattern of perception, emotion, thought, behavior, different dimensions of consciousness and human experience. And so, so the first lower circuits basically you can map onto any like developmental model of psychology. This is the mundane egoic circuits. And then where the magic happens, because there really isn't a framework for working with the upper circuits, which are the transpersonal and non-ordinary states, the transcendent states. And so so there's a saying, the map is not the territory, but a map is very helpful so that you're not getting lost in the terrain, right? So it kind of gives you a guide to understanding the different nuances and dimensions of these higher states of consciousness. Higher not meaning better, just more expansive. And so, like, for example, Stanislav Grof, he uses the terms spiritual emergence and spiritual emergency. And so if you are having sort of this, this, let's just say, whether it's a good trip or a bad trip, but just a really intense trip and it destabilizes, potentially quote unquote something in the lower circuits, and it causes you to kind of question your experience of self identity, your ego structures, and your experience of quote unquote reality. And one can, without understanding that or having a map for it, feel like they're kind of going crazy in a sense. So it kind of helps to organize and understand those experiences, deepen into exploration, normalize and validate, like, oh, this is what this means. This is in this context. This is what's going on. So it's just like, I guess, a really useful point of reference for structuring that.
Now, I do have a few questions, but you were mentioning the lower aspects of the Eighth Circuit and higher aspects. Now, I have it on the screen if you could see. Um, which ones fall into the lower and which ones fall into the higher from what I
Yes.
have?
So the lower circuits tend to develop linearly. So that's circuits 1 through 4. And that's, again, like saying how most contemporary theories of developmental psychology across the human lifespan will progress from circuit 1 is the biosurvival circuit, imprints in infancy. It's like the circuit relating to safety, security, like trusting in the world that your needs will be met. If you had a caregiver who was attuned to you and made sure that you felt like you were cared for and the world is safe. Circuit 2, the anal, emotional, territorial circuit, that relates to emotions and the hierarchy, your experience of hierarchy and your role in society, power dynamics. Whether you are sort of like a more quote unquote top dog versus bottom dog, dominant versus submissive type of person. Circuit 3, the semantic time binding circuit, and that relates to cognitive thought, creating maps of the world, models of the world, understanding it more in a rational, intellectual kind of way. And circuit 4, the sociosexual circuit, relates to morality and your role in society, how you show up in interpersonal relationships and romantic relationships. So everybody at some point, will experience those as part of growing, developing as an individual and as part of society. Not everybody necessarily experiences, or to what extent one might experience the upper circuits, which, again, just to clarify, upper does not mean better. It just means more expansive. Neurosomatic. So each of these circuits also, there's a concept of verticality, where the upper circuits sort of pair with the lower circuits, and they're sort of like in a polarity with each other. So circuit 1 relates to circuit 5, 2 to 6, 3 to 7, and 4 to 8. Obviously, it can be more complex and there's different interrelationships, but it's a really helpful, aspect of the model when working with how to ground an upper circuit experience, or using intentionality through like a psychedelic or some type of non-ordinary state to help to break a rigid pattern or re-imprint a lower circuit experience. And imprinting refers to early life conditioning. There's at different stages, like when that imprint vulnerability, that when a certain stage of development, it tends to shape how each circuit expresses itself throughout your lifespan. And once they're established, it could strongly influence how we perceive reality, again, throughout your whole lifespan. So it could be helpful to introduce like an upper circuit, quote unquote, shock to break out of some of those rigid patterns and to be able to grow past certain, blocks or traumas or conditions. And conversely, though, again, some of these upper circuit experiences could be incredibly destabilizing. So knowing how to anchor that into its the polarity that it's related to in the lower circuit. So yeah, and then like I said, so the upper circuits don't necessarily evolve linearly. So it's just like, circuit 5 is the neurosomatic circuit. Those are experiences of bliss, ecstatic states, pleasure for the sake of itself. If you're kind of locked in circuit 1 experiences and having, struggles with security, it's pretty hard if you're constantly like, I need to make sure my survival needs are met, to truly let go and enjoy, just fun for the sake of itself, because you're so stressed with life, right? The metaprogramming circuit 6, that is what we, with 8 circuit Ascension, and it's our sister organization, the Institute of Applied Metaprogramming, we kind of consider the crux of the model. So our course is based in teaching metaprogramming certification. So you're stepping into the role of metaprogrammer, right? So metaprogramming is the ability to become aware of and intentionally modify one's own nervous system and psychological programming, and essentially rewriting your own programs that normally run automatically. And this is where I, like to point that correlation between, as, occultists, as magicians, what is the point of that, right? You're basically the magician, and the metaprogrammer is kind of analogous. Circuit 7 is the neurogenetic circuit. That's where you get into those who do.
You froze there for a moment. Can you go back to number 7?
Yeah. Sorry. So the neurogenetic circuit, not everybody experiences it, or unfortunately in this, cultural milieu where some of these experiences sort of invalidated. Again, it's really helpful to have this reference, like for psi experiences, psychic phenomena, telepathy, out of there's some overlap also between circuit 7, circuit 8, but out of body experiences, astral projection, encountering, entities, or like theurgy, and all these concepts that are very normal in magical traditions, but not necessarily accepted in like the lower circuit culture that we're kind of immersed in. So that, and I do think that again, like that circuit 6 is like, I get to choose how to reprogram my lower circuits, and to grow as a person, to heal, to live, find my true will, live, in that will. And then also with that, through a lot of these, whether it's with psychedelics or occult practices, right? It's through meditation and self-reflection and experiments to open up your nervous system to new experiences that, open yourself to potentially, whether it's astral projection or encountering ancestors or entities and things of that nature. And then circuit 8, the most expansive state, it's the non-local consciousness, mystical, cosmic consciousness, the sense of non-duality, kenosis, oneness with everything, that unitive consciousness. So I know that was like a lot trying to
Oh no,
into like, so I hope that all made sense.
actually, to me it makes sense. Um, but I do have a question. So if somebody is, because because I did ask you off camera about, have you tried to map this with the onto the Kabbalah?
Mhm.
Because it in my viewpoint, it does fall into climbing the tree of life.
Mhm.
And from your explanations, it looks like if somebody was, whether you're an occultist, a magician, or a spiritualist, we do have to go through these circuits, basically, which actually makes it perfect, being called eighth circuit. And in your opinion, do you think the blockages that most people will find will most likely be within 1 to 4?
I think maybe the I can't actually answer that, but I don't. I think probably considering that's where most people tend to live, that would probably be the most like obvious starting point to work with. But all these, whether we're aware of them or not, like all of these circuits are in a sense like always online. It's not. It's so um, even if like with the upper circuits they haven't been consciously activated, you know, that might also indicate a sort of blockage. Like this is something we're inherently as humans born with this potentiality to experience these things. And so I mean, I think just that focus more so on the lower circuits, there is like inherently maybe a blocked, because of your belief systems, that you're blocking out the possibilities of the upper circuits. But then also like a starting point of like, you know, if you go through, for example, an initiatory system, you start with Malkuth and you work your way up, right? So it's going through each of those elements and those stages successively. um, so I guess it probably in that way would parallel, if that makes sense.
Yes, it does make sense, which means I'm going to go back to your book, because I did actually I haven't completely finished reading it, but I actually like the way that you guys came together and laid out the book. Um, because although to me, the Eighth Circuit Ascension is a new philosophy to me, which means you, at one chapter, you broke down terminology that people needed to know, which I think was so beneficial. And it encouraged me to read on in the book. And I know are there any particular terminologies from that chapter that you wanted to highlight from your book that you think people need to be aware of?
Yeah, so we already, I guess, covered a couple of them or a few of them. So we talked a bit about like what is a circuit, what is imprinting, what is metaprogramming. We talked a little bit about the neurogenetic and transpersonal circuits. I guess a few other ones that would be of use. There's a term reality tunnel, which was popularized by Robert Anton Wilson, which refers to the idea that each person perceives and interprets the world through a unique conditioned filter, which was shaped by, you know, their lens, right? Their biology, their language, their cultures, past experiences. So no one experiences quote unquote objective reality, but rather their own constructed version of it, which then brings us to the idea of neural relativity, which is the idea that was articulated by Timothy Leary, that each nervous system generates its own version of reality. So, like what we experience as like quote unquote the world is always relative to the structure, conditioning, and state of the brain that's perceiving it. Um, and then Robert Anton Wilson always used to like to refer to Orr's law, which refers to the thinker and the prover. And that refers to the principle that whatever the mind believes to be true, the thinker, the brain will automatically seek evidence, like confirmation bias, to prove, that thought. Like, so that's the prover. So it reinforces the belief regardless of its objective accuracy. I think those are like, there's a whole glossary in the back of the book. But I think that those are some pretty relevant key terms to just kind of have a sense of when working with the model.
Actually, thank you. That actually, because like I said, that particular chapter, which is chapter 1, goes really in depth, as well as in depth with the chapter in that chapter you also go in depth with the 8 circuit ascension definitions. But you also do reference some prominent doctors that most people may not be familiar with. I mean, most people hear the name Dr. Timothy Leary, but most people are not familiar with his work. And you do go in depth with how he's a contributor to this line of study. Do you want to expand on that?
Yeah. So, well, Tim Leary was the first person to actually, he was the originator of the model. His first works on it was Exopsychology, which was published in 1979, I think, off the top of my head. And then later it was revised and republished as Infopsychology in the late 80s. And this was part of his work with, obviously, the psychedelics. But he was also a Harvard psychologist before some of the controversial stuff happened there. And the whole is becoming that quote unquote psychedelic guru and that counterculture icon. But yeah, and then it was later after him popularized again in the subculture anyway by Robert Anton Wilson. He actually did his dissertation on the 8 circuit model, which was to later become his book, the landmark book that really got the model out there and made it more accessible to people. It's called Prometheus Rising. If you guys have not read it, highly recommend that book. It's amazing. And just listening, I can listen to that man talk for hours. He's one of the most interesting people. If you go on YouTube and just look up his interviews, he's just fascinating. He's got this encyclopedic brain and just so much information, and just the way that he presents it, it's highly entertaining and very much enriching and worth listening to. So then it was Antero Ali. He further developed the model as well. He worked with something called paratheater. It was sort of like a type of improv acting, and he utilized the model so he created these more embodied experiential praxis for working with the model, which he then put out in his works, Angel Tech and the 8 circuit brain. And I was grateful that I actually had the opportunity before he passed to study the 8 circuit brain model with him in one of his courses. And then like more indirectly, like Aleister Crowley, his ideas about like stages of consciousness and the evolution of the individual will, which influenced Tim Leary and Robert Anton Wilson. Dr. John Lilly, he wrote Programming and Metaprogramming the Human Computer, and he coined the term metaprogramming, and so a lot of his ideas are incorporated in the model. And then like Terence McKenna, just for kind of bringing the discussion of psychedelic states and expanded consciousness into broader cultural discourse. And there's just so many, and just sort of for the contemporaries, the work that I'm doing with David J. Brown, obviously with Dr. Douglas Wingate on our work on the 8 circuit ascension, but also some forthcoming stuff with David J. Brown and Sarah Finn Huntley. We got our DMT entities oracle deck based in the 8 circuit model coming out, hopefully available for pre-order in the next few months. Some other contemporary peers, Zach West, who applies the 8 circuit model to learning and writing music, which is really fascinating. So he's got some interesting work with it. And Mariana Pinson. She's out in Germany, and she does works with the 8 circuit model in relation to chaos magic. So yeah, it's out there, and it's kind of, I feel like it's hitting that critical mass where it's just ready to, just enter more pockets of the, subcultures, and hopefully we'll make it break through into, be able to help as a tool for the broader culture at large.
Actually, that
Oh,
that actually
you're breaking up.
I'm sorry. It actually sounds exciting uh as it's progressing. Now, I do have several questions, but the one I want to ask you is uh do you believe this course of study helps prove that magic and spirituality and those things that quote unquote cannot be proven as of yet is closer to using this model and going down this route of making it more solidified and more, how can I say, accessible to those who may not tread on this,
Hmm.
uh, like along the lines of math and what science used to be back in the dark ages?
Yeah, and that's part of, I think, with just this shift in the culture towards more openness to the use of psychedelics, and more interest in these psycho spiritual states and or practices. More people are doing yoga. More people are just interested in things that kind of transcend the mundane, and um, there is this sort of, just witnessing it over the past several decades, you can really see it, and especially with the younger generations, there's sort of this more, especially with social media, and just different snippets of information sort of planting these seeds throughout the culture. It's more available, more normalized. And then so Dr. Doug and I just recently presented on our work at so in psychology, there's APA is the American Psychological Association, and then, although I'm sure as a whole they would not be too like into our work, but in terms of like they have subdivisions. So Division 32 is the subdivision that deals with like humanistic and existential transpersonal psychology, and so this would fall under that category. There's a what's called in the subdivisions, they have like task force, so like further subdivisions. And so there's this one called ACORN, the anomalous cognition, and what was the other, basically not, they study all these non-ordinary states of consciousness, and everything from psychic phenomena to experience of reincarnation, near death experiences, telekinesis, basically everything pertaining to circuits 6, 7, and 8. And and these are all scholars and people who do work in the field, and probably surprising to many people, a lot of this stuff is actually studied at pretty renowned, respectable institutions. Like the University of Virginia has what's called the Division of Perceptual Studies, and they study exactly that. And this is a major medical school it's a part of. Princeton has its department that looks at it, and I believe so does where else? University of, oh man, there's a bunch off the top of my head. I don't know why I'm blanking, but there, I think Duke as well, like pretty, again, very reputable institutions that are looking at this. It's just not really, again, in terms of the more what's considered acceptable. I mean, let's be real. It's, a lot of times it's about money, right? So insurance companies are not gonna, they're not, this isn't on their radar as something that's going to be worth investing in, right? So it's like things like CBT and all these other evidence-based, which have their, place and their merit, but they focus on, it seems, or pharmaceuticals, right? Like what is, the shortest acting, like here we could just prescribe this or do these 10 to 15 sessions and you should be good to go. they don't really care about, the holistic well-being of a person. Unfortunately, they don't really care about the, enhancing like how the psycho-spiritual emergence, how that could affect one's life and improve quality of life. It's I feel like a lot of it is very like just influence for, follow the money type of a thing.
Actually, I do have another question, but you actually put along these lines. There were two things I was going to ask you, but you brought in the insurance. So when it comes to insurance, do they actually play a heavy hand on grants and the progress of these types of research?
Yeah, I mean that's that, and then obviously, I mean, there's been a lot of progress made with legality. Tim Leary is sort of demonized as being responsible.
I'm sorry, you froze. Are you still
And
with
then
me?
there you
Oh, I'm
are.
sorry, you froze. You froze there for a moment. I'm sorry.
Yeah,
Oh,
so I'm
you were
not.
saying Tim Leary.
Yeah, so he was sort of demonized for his um, because of his controversial, like encouraging people to think for themselves, question authority, for example, like question the Vietnam War. The Nixon administration was not too happy with him, and various other, um, things going on in that era. So, like, he was kind of he went rogue. So, then psychedelics were then scheduled as all, schedule one means there's, high, allegedly high potential for abuse and no therapeutic value. So it's like the strictest, most severe scheduling of a substance. And, psychedelics were put in that category. Only more recently, because of, I mean, I would credit Dr. Rick Strassman as being, obviously most people can, would maybe think of MAPS and various other organizations as to this creating this breakthrough where psychedelics are more acceptable, and there's research grants and funding for them. But if you trace it back, I would say that Rick Strassman is really that person who made that all possible because of his early 90s work. And so I actually had the privilege to be a fly on the wall in a sense for his study. So I got to analyze his bedside notes from his early 90s DMT studies as for my dissertation. And so, and in that, just exchanges with Rick, just knowing his process, and he's like an incredibly brilliant, so rigorous in his process. And he shared a bit. I don't know, like, how much he would want me to share about like what he shared with me, but just basically using his um, just academic prowess and his brilliant insights was able to actually be the first person, for those early 90s studies to get approval from the DEA and the FDA to, as a medical doctor at the time, I believe it was University of New Mexico in, I want to say Albuquerque, and that he was able to do these studies. And nobody before then was able to actually do that since 1970. And you couldn't even, mention psychedelics or consciousness or anything like that. I remember when I was in school, that was sort of like the don't ever say that you're interested in psychedelics or consciousness, but I'm sort of like a unconventional renegade type of person. So I'm like, oh yeah, I'm into all these things I'm not supposed to be into. But that attitude actually was really great because it opened up so many doors early on before, before it was cool and everybody's like a psychedelic expert now. But because of Rick's work, he pioneered that. And then with his model, all of these other organizations and researchers were able to apply that and now get, grants and funding and also permissions, through regulatory bodies, both within the United States and throughout the world. Um, and yeah, and then like in terms of so insurance companies and how that's accessible to people. I mean, it's still like, even for example, like right now, the only psychedelic that's, or it's not even a psychedelic technically, but legal. So psychedelic-like substance would be ketamine, and that's available for prescription. It's a Schedule III drug, so it is prescribable, and that's something I work with as a ketamine-assisted therapist slash coach, an integration specialist. But so it so like for example with ketamine, so in psychedelic assisted therapy, typically the current model so there's prep sessions, because everything is about set and setting and dose, right? So it's getting a person prepared and ready to go into an experiential session, setting intentions. What are they wanting to work on? Are there any fears, concerns with their previous experiences? Kind of just setting the stage for it so that it optimizes the journey itself. Obviously the experiential session, where the person takes whether it's ketamine or if they have the opportunity, depending on where they live, whatever psychedelic that might be. And then the integration session where, you reflect on, what was that experience, how to, interpret that, and then integrate that, embody that in your daily life. If there is places that you can benefit from changing or surrendering to, or whatever that looks like. And in our book, we talk about the hermit phase. We just kind of really, emphasize the value of like right after the journey, taking that time to just disconnect from, your responsibilities, to really set aside like that feeling into the experience, journaling about it, or whatever your go-to, like if you would rather do art or dance or whatever that is, but to just sit with that and letting that just absorb really into your system and being with that experience. So insurance companies with ketamine will typically considering in the context of regular therapy, cover the prep sessions, maybe the first hour of the ketamine session, and then the integration sessions, right? So that would leave then a typical ketamine journey will be about 3 hours. So that would mean a person would have to pay for 2 hours of the 3 hours out of pocket. So it's definitely more accessible in terms of affordability than, say, in places where psilocybin or MDMA are available, because those are just naturally, by the virtue of the drug, longer experiences. And so you're having to pay out of pocket or go on these retreats. So it really does hinder the availability to the average person because of those unfortunate financial blocks through, these whether it's insurance companies or, again, like the APA, who prioritizes things that are more with their lobbyists determined to be more bang for buck and more valuable in the short term anyway.
When dealing with insurance, that makes sense. Because that's basically not just with this, but other medication. But overall, I do have to ask, how is the scientific community? How do they take to this form of research, especially with the stigma of the MK Ultra controversy that keeps coming up? How do they portray or view this type of research?
I honestly can't answer that. I don't really work in that. That's not something that I've ever, I know what MK Ultra is. You know what MK Ultra is. I'm not sure that, even though it's more and more accepted and known about since it's been released through the FOIA request, but I'm not sure that that's really something that most people that I know of anyway refer to or consider.
The reason why I ask is I'm wondering if you see resistance from the average person who don't have the knowledge that you have when it comes to the research, because you do have to, get volunteers for research and stuff like that. And I know most people's psychedelics itself has a stigma.
Mm-hmm.
And most people are either way to the Woodside. How can I say? It's not Woodside. Is it Woodside? The hippie movement.
Okay. So there's
They're more. They either think of that.
Mm-hmm.
The association with that, or the association with MK Ultra. So I'm wondering, when you're doing your research, do you see that resistance from people due to one or the other?
No, I mean, at this, just sort of, so I'm not actively personally doing research myself right now. Um, so I don't actually have the demographic information I think that you're looking for. But what I can sort of observe, um, so again, having worked for MAPS, so MAPS, I was working with them as an adherence rater. So basically, I would watch their MDMA PTSD studies. Like I would watch the videos of the sessions, and then making sure that there's a whole list of things that you're looking for that the therapist was doing in the session, and or it's sort of like a quality control in a sense. But in terms of that was also able to be used as like reference points for like analysis, like research, quantitative analysis, qualitative analysis, and then also like ethics, like if there was anything that seemed, like a breach of safety or concerning, anything like that. So I wasn't part of like MAPS like recruitment process or anything of that nature, but because of, I would say, like the what we're seeing in terms of this psychedelic renaissance, where that happened was around, it was in August of 2017 when the FDA granted MAPS, or MDMA therapy, what they call breakthrough status. And they saw it as like, they put it on a fast track for approval because they saw it as, the results were so significant that they wanted, at the time anyway, of course, there's currently some forks in the road there. And so we'll see where it goes from here. But, at the time, or bumps in the road, sorry. So at the time they were like, for the first time, you would see in like the New York Times and or all of these mainstream publications were like now starting to like write up these articles on MDMA assisted therapy. And then shortly after that, that Michael Pollan, he wrote that book, How to Change Your Mind. And because of that, then again, the New York Times and all of these mainstream publications started to write about it. And so in that, there was like this cultural shift, that all of a sudden now everybody, it seems like, we're super interested in, wow, what are the potentials of psychedelics? How can this help me? How can this change my life? Or, just this curiosity, this like broader cultural curiosity, where like just right before that, you just weren't supposed to talk about it. Psychedelics were just another drug. Drugs are bad, okay, type of thing. And then now, all of a sudden, more and more people are like, oh, like, what's this about? And then all these ideas associated with it and experiences that people have read about or saw somebody else talking about. It really opened up this, just broader cultural interest. So that's what we're seeing now. And I think, but there's just such a spectrum of people, and what information that, in terms of their quote unquote reality tunnels, right? What they're familiar with, where they're coming from, what they've studied, what they're interested is, how deep they've gone down any particular rabbit hole. So it's hard to generalize to like have an answer, I think, for something like that, from my perspective anyway.
That's understandable. You did mention in your research that you do deal with people with PTSD. And I'm curious to see what was the results from your research from that using the Eighth Circuit, Ascension, and psychedelics.
Yeah, no, well, so again, like the research part is my affiliation with, for example, the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies. So that was separate. So that was their research on MDMA and PTSD. And they work typically with veterans and sexual assault survivors. And basically, like, because in the beginning, like, in order to even to do studies like that, the participants would have to have tried and exhausted all kinds of other different modalities first, and nothing worked. So you had the most, which really highlights how effective the treatment was, right? Because if these were like cases where, some of these people couldn't leave their homes, couldn't work, and it was they tried all these things and nothing worked, the fact that their results in, phases 1 and 2 were so significant, where, two-thirds to 75% of the people in these trials were no longer even able to be diagnosed as having PTSD anymore, or that because there's also been some qualitative studies. So even those who still had the diagnosis, when they talk about their quality of life, the profound shifts in their experience and how it's more manageable. So that really is a testimonial to the effectiveness of it, because, the starting point, these are, really, really severe cases. And that, to get to that point then after just such a short amount of time, that their lives have been so dramatically transformed is amazing. But like I said, so for my work, I have more direct, experiential, practical work with people, but it's not currently anyway in the context of like research trials.
Actually, and you did mention MAPS, which I'm going to ask you if you can define that and what that means, because a lot of the people who may be viewing this may not be familiar with that terminology.
So MAPS is the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies, and they've been around since actually the early '80s, and their founder Rick Doblin, has been part of this whole process to legalize psychedelics, and focusing specifically on MDMA, which again isn't similar to ketamine. Like, they're not technically classical psychedelics, which are usually defined, is based on their activity on the 5-HT2A receptor, which is a type of serotonin receptor. But nonetheless, they induce sort of psychedelic-like experiences, and enough so that, for all intents and purposes, are classified as a type of psychedelic assisted therapy. And so, yeah, so basically through MAPS, through his organization, they've just been conducting all these different studies, and in particular, the closest one that came to being approved, which again, they're unfortunately having some setbacks, but that being the MDMA PTSD clinical trials, which made it through, phases 1 and 2. And then, phase 3, that final stage, they had some feedback that they have to address before they can move forward. So hopefully they figure that out, because again, there's just so many people that could be benefiting from this that are unable to at this moment.
Actually, that's wonderful. It's any way we could help anybody with PTSD, which is any help is welcome. That's all I have to say. But I have to, now we're going to shift gears a little, because the writing of this book and this research has led you to another endeavor, which I'm happy that you're announcing here, is your owl your owl business. If you could explain that to us.
Yeah,
what
and so
this is.
owl,
And
yeah. So I'm sure you and some of your listeners might appreciate the name. So Of Will and Love, of course, is sort of a nod to the Lima. And so just that principle of helping to guide people based on finding your true self and living with that love and that passion that comes from living in alignment with your true will. And so just kind of wanting to branch out and offer more one-to-one direct services for those who might be interested, with the 8th Circuit model and psychospiritual exploration and guidance, whether that's with ketamine or divination, just more broadly, just life guidance and coaching in general. And like I said, I have the Oracle deck coming out. The pre-order will be available in a few months. That's with David J. Brown and Sarah Finn Huntley. And we based that on the 8th Circuit model. So I have a demo deck that we had printed. So although it's not available yet for sale, that's something I do also work with, is doing, divinations and coaching based or utilizing that as a tool. So if anybody's interested in checking that out, I'm able to offer that sort of in advance as well.
Do you know how long before you know the pre-order is ready for that?
So we just recently, in the past, like a little over a month ago, submitted our manuscript and artwork to Inner Traditions. And so that's just the whole, how it depends on their editing process, how quickly it actually hits the market. So, but from what I understand, they do make the pre-order available, probably into the next few months. So I'm not too sure of the actual like release date for the deck, but I guess for anybody interested, to just keep that on your radar. And again, hopefully, maybe
If you let me know when that pre-order is coming, I can have you back on.
Awesome.
There's so
Thank
much
you.
more.
Love that.
Now with Owl of Will and Love, you are providing coaching, healing, and guidance for those on the spiritual path. Now you don't have to necessarily be a Thelemite or anything like that, or a magician. As long as you're on your spiritual path and you're looking for healing, you offer those services to help guide the people along, using your knowledge and your expertise within this, with the spiritual spice in there.
Well said. Yes, thank you.
Now, well, it's almost an hour, and actually, I thank you for spending this time with us. Now, I have to ask you, one, can you tell people where to get your book, and two, how to reach you for your services as well?
Yeah, so the book is available. So the main textbook, Eighth Circuit Ascension, A Guide to Metaprogramming the Multidimensional Self, is available through Amazon, Barnes and Nobles, or directly through our publishers, Original Falcon Press. And then the workbook, as I mentioned, should be coming out in the next couple of weeks. We've submitted the final draft, which was approved. So it's just whatever their final touches and getting the cover and the Library of Congress number and all those like logistical things taken care of. So that should be out in the next couple of weeks. Again, same Amazon, Barnes and Noble, publisher's website, Original Falcon Press. Again, keeping an eye out for the DMT Entities Oracle deck through Inner Traditions, which thank you again. I'll look forward to coming back when that's available for pre-order. And then, my services with Of Will and Love, and also for Eighth Circuit Ascension, if you want to dive a little more deeply into that work, we have a website, www.8thcircuitascension.com, and we have our work available on there. Also, my co-author, he wrote a book, Circuits in Shen, again, which I mentioned earlier, that correlates the applications of the Eighth Circuit model to traditional Chinese medicine, and a couple of his other books that he wrote, like divination related to the Eighth Circuit model and using runes, and another one using the I Ching. And then some of our other interviews and presentations, upcoming events. And if you want to contact us or get on our mailing list, you could do that through our website. And then for Of Will and Love, I just am setting up the website, and so I do have an email address, but I'm not sure. I'm still ironing out a bunch of kinks. So I think it's probably better if I just give my direct email address. Would be maybe you can put this up when you maybe in the description or whatever, but rturetzky phd@gmail.com. And so you can reach out to me directly with any inquiries. And I'll have a Calendly consultation calendar available to make appointments for. I offer a 15-minute free consultation for anybody who is interested and wants to see if I would be a good fit to work with them.
Perfect. And before we sign off, there was something I wanted to mention that you did mention in your book. you are within the book, you offer a certification.
Thank you.
What do you?
Yes. Actually, okay, so excited about that. So, Doug and I are currently recording the course. So, there's going to be 2 tiers. So, the first tier is certified meta programmer. It's laying the foundations, working with the model, understanding how to work with the circuits. Again, as I shared earlier, we kind of come from the stance of like the circuit 6 or the meta programming circuit is like that access point to all these other circuits, and you're stepping into the role of meta programmer, whether you're working on yourself or guiding other people. So it's basically guiding people to use the model for, whether again you just want to use it for yourself or to be able to in your profession, whether you're a coach, a therapist, whatever healing modality or support that you might offer, that you have a fully grounded, laid out, just this tool that you're able to now professionally apply. And then the master practitioner certification course, which we'll release after that, where it's if you want to be able to then like really master it and to teach other people, and it will have a whole additional clinical toolkit that will be available with that course as well. So then we started recording, so we're hoping that goes live within the next like month or two. Hopefully, around the same time our workbook is available.
So if you're interested in that, first pick up 8 Circuit Ascension, which is available on Amazon, and keep a lookout for the videos and the certification courses, which once you get that going and you have a link, I'll be more than happy to attach it to the bottom of this description.
Thank you.
Excuse me, sorry. And I do look forward to having you back on so we could explore this more often. And for everyone listening, thank you for joining us. And until next time, bye-bye.
So much fun. Thank you.